The fiasco of Batman and Robin is different from most Hollywood disasters because nobody thought it could fail. Not the studio, not the director, not the cast. As far as Warner Brothers was concerned, this thing was bulletproof. The risks, supposedly zero. The studio and director Joel Schumacher were so confident that they didn't even bother fighting to keep Val Kilmer. When Kilmer chose the sane over returning for another round in the Batsuit, Warner basically shrugged. Schumacher certainly didn't lose any sleep over it. In fact, he was probably relieved. Because during Batman Forever, Schumacher and Kilmer had been at each other's throats. Schumacher later described Kilmer as a moody, difficult child. Kilmer, for his part, reportedly saw Schumacher as a hack who couldn't direct his way out of a paper bag. In later interviews, Schumacher openly admitted he resisted any attempt by the studio to lure Kilmer back. According to him, his refusal to work with Kilmer again was one of the deciding factors. Today, just about everyone involved talks about the movie like it was a slow-motion train wreck they somehow saw coming. Cast members now say they knew during filming that the movie was going to be terrible. But let's not rewrite history. When production started, actors were lining up outside Warner Brothers to get into this thing. Chris O'Donnell, for example, turned down a role in Men in Black because he was afraid of being replaced in the Batman franchise the way Kilmer had been. He didn't want to lose his spot. Years later, O'Donnell would call passing on Men in Black the biggest mistake of his career. And honestly, that one probably stings. Filming itself, surprisingly smooth. According to Schumacher, it was the easiest shoot of his entire career. No chaos, no disasters, no visible warning signs. And ironically, that may have been the last time anything about this movie felt easy. The real trouble started when the footage hit the studio. Test screenings were brutal. We're talking catastrophic reactions. The film was immediately sent back for reshoots and aggressively trimmed down. Entire sections were cut without mercy. The person hit hardest by this was Alicia Silverstone. By the time the final version reached theaters, almost nothing of her character remained. And the reason wasn't just story pacing. After test screenings, reports leaked to the press that Silverstone had gained weight during filming, and that it was noticeable on screen. The media pounced. Major Hollywood publications openly mocked her appearance. Headlines and late-night jokes focused on her supposed inability to maintain her weight. It turned into a feeding frenzy. Schumacher publicly defended her in interviews as best he could. But behind the scenes, the studio reached for the scissors anyway. Funny how those same headlines probably wouldn't fly in today's era of body positivity and online accountability. The only person who walked through the marketing campaign mostly untouched was George Clooney. And that's probably because Clooney did what Clooney does best. He leaned into the jokes. In interviews, he was charming, self-aware, and quick with a punchline. It's hard to stay mad at someone who's already laughing at himself. During one promotional interview, the main cast was asked what prop they would take home from the set. Arnold Schwarzenegger said he'd take Mr. Freeze's armor. Uma Thurman said she loved her character's giant floral throne. Elle Macpherson said she wouldn't mind keeping a cap with the movie's logo. And George Clooney? He said the only thing he wanted to take home was Elle Macpherson, which, to be fair, is very on-brand Clooney. When Batman and Robin hit theaters in June 1997, it became the first Batman movie that failed to dominate the US summer box office. The opening weekend numbers were strong worldwide. For a brief moment, everything looked fine. And then came the second weekend. The drop was historic. One of the sharpest declines Warner Brothers had ever seen. And that wasn't even the worst part. Critics tore it apart. Audiences rejected it. Ratings sank straight to the basement. It wasn't divisive. It wasn't misunderstood. It was broadly and loudly disliked. And the fallout was immediate. Warner Brothers had plans, big ones. In the 90s, they were already thinking about building a DC cinematic universe long before that term existed. After Batman and Robin, the plan was to release a solo film centered on Chris O'Donnell's Robin. Then a Superman movie starring Nicolas Cage. Yes, that Nicolas Cage Superman project was very real. And the next logical step after that? A Batman versus Superman movie. All of it was scrapped. Instantly, those projects were tossed in the trash, and the studio pivoted toward either a futuristic Batman concept or a full reboot. For years, Schumacher reportedly hovered around the studio trying to secure funding for a third installment, promising he would fix everything. He claimed he'd learned his lesson. Warner Brothers declined. Instead, several years later, they handed the franchise to Christopher Nolan for Batman Begins. Schumacher, understandably frustrated, later shifted blame to the studio. According to him, Warner pushed hard for a brighter, more cartoonish tone to sell toys. If the studio hadn't interfered, he claimed, both Batman Forever and Batman and Robin would have been very different films. He says his original pitch for Batman Forever was much darker. The story was supposed to revolve around Bruce Wayne questioning whether he was doing more harm than good as Batman. A psychological angle. A conflicted hero. But Warner allegedly asked him to lighten it up. Make it colorful, make it fun, make it marketable. Dark introspection doesn't move action figures, which raises the obvious question: if that vision mattered so much, why agree to direct movies that contradicted it? We'll probably never get a fully honest answer. Hollywood rarely admits when the real creative motivation is simply a paycheck. John Glover, who appeared in the film, later recalled that every shooting day began the same way. Schumacher would climb up somewhere high on set with a megaphone and shout, "Remember, we're making a big cartoon." Glover admitted that performing under constant reminders that you're inside a giant cartoon made it difficult to ground anything emotionally. Subtlety was not exactly encouraged. Of all the cast members, George Clooney arguably emerged the least damaged. He regularly criticizes Batman and Robin, calling it one of the biggest wastes of money in Hollywood history. But he also acknowledges that his career actually accelerated afterward. In a strange way, the failure didn't hurt him. It might have helped. That's a rare kind of flop immunity. Uma Thurman, interestingly, remains one of the most positive voices about the experience. She says she genuinely enjoyed working on the film. It was her first major blockbuster. She was given creative freedom with her performance. And she remembers the production fondly. There's even a long-running rumor that if someone approached George Clooney on the street back then and told him they didn't like Batman and Robin, he would personally reimburse them for their ticket. Whether that actually happened or not almost doesn't matter. It sounds exactly like something he would do. At this point, it's hard to pinpoint exactly who deserves the blame for how the movie turned out. The studio? The director? The marketing strategy? The toy deals? The tone shift? Probably some combination of all of it. Personally, I've never fully understood why Batman Forever was received relatively positively while Batman and Robin was not. Yes, the latter is worse. But visually, they operate in the same neon universe. The same hyper-saturated colors. The same camp humor. The same toy aisle energy. The difference feels less like style and more like timing. The moment audiences finally decided they'd had enough. It's especially unfortunate because the underperformance of Batman Returns had already pushed Warner Brothers to change direction. Tim Burton's planned third Batman film was supposed to feature only one villain, the Riddler, and no Robin at all. Burton reportedly found Robin boring, silly, and completely incompatible with the darker tone he wanted for Batman. That version never happened. Instead, the franchise took a turn towards spectacle, neon lighting, and merchandising strategy. And when the box office finally said no, the correction was swift and absolute. The cape would eventually rise again, but for a while Batman and Robin froze the entire DC universe in place. That was Frameback. See you on the next Rewind.